All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. And anyone else that can join, they'll just hop on when they get there. So, hello, my name is Shannon Crowley, and I'm a registered dietitian here at Mother of Fact, specializing in maternal care. So, Mother of Fact is a telehealth platform for nutrition care from registered dietitians for women from pre-pregnancy fertility issues throughout their pregnancy and beyond. We specialize in high-risk nutrition intervention and care and work primarily with birthing people from resource-restricted areas. If you have questions or curiosities about Mother Fact, who we are, and what we do, I can drop my email address in the chat and you can feel free to message me after we finish the webinar. So just a quick reminder to please keep your microphone on mute and just put your questions in the chat, and we'll save those until the end of the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many as we can as possible. So that said, welcome to our fourth webinar, the final session of our 2025 Mother of Fact webinar series. We also do have the free recordings available for the first three sessions, and we covered managing nausea and food aversions in that first trimester, eating for energy, and also gestational diabetes prevention and management. So if you're interested, I can also send that link in the chat as well to access those recordings. Our topic today is what to eat in that third trimester to support birth and postpartum recovery. Before we jump in, I want to introduce our presenter and one of our dietitians on our team, Alicia Chacha Miller. So Alicia Chacha Miller is a registered dietitian specializing in maternal and pediatric nutrition, and she is the Chief Clinical Officer for Mother of Fact. Her work is rooted in health equity with a focus on bridging disparities that impact communities of color and historically marginalized communities by making nutrition education available, accessible, inclusive, and easy to understand. A former WIC clinic manager and public health advocate, she leads the charge at Mother of Fact in helping to bring inclusive and personalized nutrition, counseling, and education to moms, babies, children, families, and at-risk communities. Her work has been featured in media publications like Parents, HuffPost, and Mom Junction. Chacha's approach to nutrition is found at the intersection where evidence-based practice, cultural humility, diversity, inclusion, and compassion all collide. She believes in meeting people where they are and honoring their lived experiences to empower lasting, meaningful change. Now, please welcome Chacha.
Thank you so much for that intro, Shannon. I definitely appreciate it. And thank you so much to everyone who is joining us, whether that's live or whether you're watching the recording, who's joining us for our last session of the Mother of Fact webinar series in 2025. I do want to encourage you to stay tuned because we have a ton more fun webinars and support groups and all sorts of cool stuff coming in 2026. So that said, let's just kind of jump right in here. So as Shannon mentioned, my name is Chacha Miller. I am a registered dietitian and the Chief Clinical Officer at Mother of Fact. Now, today we're going to be talking about what to eat in the third trimester to support birth and postpartum recovery. For any of us who have walked the walk, who have lived through this experience, and honestly, even if you haven't lived through it yourself, but you work with pregnant and birthing patients regularly, you know that the third trimester is a lot, right? It's exciting, it's uncomfortable, it's emotional, and it's basically filled with all of the preparation for birth and postpartum recovery, right? So my goal for today is to make this feel more simple. We'll talk about kind of what to eat, what actually matters, how to support your body through the final stretch of pregnancy and into early postpartum. All right, here we go. So our agenda for today. So we're going to start with the essential nutrients that support labor, delivery, and healing. We'll talk about nutrition strategies that can help lower preeclampsia risk, which is something that I am super passionate about. Then we'll get into practical third trimester eating, how to stay nourished when literally there's like no room left. We'll look at traditional remedies like dates and red raspberry leaf tea. We'll look at what the research actually says, as a practicing dietitian, I always get a ton of questions about this. And if you work with patients, I'm sure you do as well. And then we'll end with preparing for breastfeeding success. I really want this to feel doable and grounded in real life, not perfection, because as we all know, pregnancy, parenting, life, sometimes life likes to life and we come to learn to expect the unexpected. So this isn't about perfection, it's really about practical and supportive guidance. All right, so first, getting into essential nutrients for birth and recovery. So, we are going to start with iron because iron is basically your foundation for delivery and for healing. So, in the third trimester, your blood volume is at its highest, and your body is kind of preparing for the normal blood loss that happens during birth, right? So, getting enough iron during the third trimester, it helps prevent that extreme fatigue crash that can happen postpartum, right? So, iron can come from heme sources, and your heme sources are going to be kind of like your meat sources, right? So, red meat, chicken, sardines, things like that. And your body naturally absorbs this type of iron a little bit more easily and can utilize it a little bit better, right? But plant-based sources like lentils, tofu, even dark chocolate, which is always fun for pregnant people in the third trimester, and fortified cereals. These are all great sources of iron as well. And I always encourage that when consuming iron, try your best or encourage your patients to try their best to pair these non-heme sources, so these non kind of animal-based, meat-based sources with vitamin C, which kind of acts as a key to unlock the door, right? And just allows the iron to flow into the body more efficiently and effectively and allows our bodies to utilize it a little bit better. So I do always encourage the patients that I work with to try taking their iron supplements separate from things like coffee, tea, or high calcium foods like dairy foods, because iron and calcium, they like to compete for absorption. And I like to tell my patients, because sometimes, when they hear that, it feels scary and they're like, oh my gosh, like, am I doing something wrong? Like, is this going to harm me or my baby? No, it's not harmful. However, you just want your body to be able to utilize these nutrients to the best of its ability, which is why we encourage your iron supplements and then your calcium containing foods, or your iron rich foods and your calcium supplements or containing foods to be consumed separately. Okay, DHA. So, DHA is one of my favorite nutrients to talk about in late pregnancy. So, this is the period when your baby's brain is growing really fast. So, getting at least 250 milligrams of DHA a day, and ideally more if possible, it supports that brain development, and it can also help to lower the risk of postpartum depression. So you can get DHA from foods like salmon, sardines, anchovies, or as an alternative, you can get it from a high quality prenatal DHA supplement. Algae-based DHA is also a great option if you're working with plant-based patients. So you can always defer to that. Now, I will say that a lot of prenatal supplements are starting to include DHA in the formulation. However, it is not always enough. So if you are a birthing person or if you are working with birthing people who are later in the pregnancy, really throughout the entire pregnancy, I would just encourage you to double check how much DHA is in their supplement if they are taking a supplement that contains DHA, and either consider the possibility of supplementing with DHA containing foods or adding additional DHA supplementation on top of that if getting those foods in the diet is not practical or reasonable. Now, since we're talking about brain development, I also want to shout out a lesser known nutrient called choline. Now, choline is my absolute favorite nutrient. I like to call it the smart baby nutrient. I generally recommend between 450 to 550 milligrams throughout the duration of pregnancy, but there actually is some good research to show that increasing that amount to around 1,000 milligrams, like 900 to 1,000 milligrams in the third trimester, actually has additional benefits for babies' brain development. Now, when it comes to prenatals, most prenatals either don't have any choline in them, or they don't have enough. So, similar to the DHA, I always recommend checking the prenatal, looking at how much either DHA or choline is in it, and kind of figuring out, okay, well, where can we get the additional choline from? Now, eggs are one of the best food sources of choline. Two large eggs contains about 300 milligrams of choline. So if that is an option for patients, then I definitely encourage them to, go crazy on eggs, have a party with all the eggs. But if you are like me, and if you are not a fan of eggs, then supplementing with a good quality choline supplement can also work as well. All right, so now we're getting into protein. So, protein, we like to call these proteins the building blocks of the body, right? And when you are creating a human, your body is literally building a whole lot of things. So, protein is super important, particularly during late pregnancy, really throughout the entire pregnancy, but as you get ready for labor and delivery, because protein is also really important for healing. So, you're supporting blood volume, you're supporting your baby's growth, as I mentioned, your own muscle recovery. And if you plan to breastfeed, then you are laying the foundation for milk production. Another reason that protein is so incredibly important. So, I usually recommend aiming for a kind of palm-sized protein source at each meal. That's like a simple rule that patients can follow to ensure that they are getting what they need. So this could look like eggs, also choline containing, which, we love. So that could look like eggs, it could look like beans or lentils, it could look like yogurt or chicken or tofu or fish. But particularly during the third trimester, I encourage my patients to try to prioritize a source of protein at each meal and snack, just to make sure that your body is getting enough and getting what it needs. All right, so vitamin C. So, vitamin C is going to be your healing buddy, essentially. It supports collagen formation, and it also, as we talked about previously, it boosts iron, it boosts the iron absorption, right? So, you generally don't need like extremely high doses of vitamin C. You generally don't need a vitamin C supplement. Most prenatals are going to contain vitamin C. And then, as an additional insurance, you just want to make sure you or your patients are getting enough fruits and veggies. Most fruits and veggies are a good source of vitamin C. So just prioritizing intake of your fiber-rich fruits and veggies, and then also what's coming from your prenatal. So, magnesium, that's another important nutrient. It helps with things like leg cramps, which are very common in the third trimester, sleep, muscle relaxation, and it can even help reduce preeclampsia risk. So, things like pumpkin seeds or almonds, again, dark chocolate, leafy greens, these are all great food sources of magnesium. You can also take a magnesium supplement. I would just recommend checking in with your provider to make sure that it's the right kind of magnesium and that it's enough to kind of address what you need. So preeclampsia is something that a lot of families worry about, especially if you are high risk for preeclampsia or if it has happened in a previous pregnancy. Black women in particular are at increased risk for developing preeclampsia. So it is something that I am incredibly passionate about as a practitioner. Now, there are a lot of things, a lot of lifestyle things you can do to help prevent preeclampsia, and nutrition is kind of just one piece of the whole puzzle. So, the strongest evidence that we have is around calcium and vitamin D. So ideally, I like to encourage my patients to get around 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium daily. And that can be from a combination of whole foods and supplements as well. So foods like your dairy-rich foods, also your fortified plant-based dairy alternatives. It could be leafy greens. It could be foods like tahini. It could be canned salmon with bones. All of these foods are going to be a pretty good source of calcium. If for whatever reason, incorporating those foods into the diet are not ideal, you can always supplement as well. I'll use myself as an example. Calcium containing foods, I just wasn't able to consume a lot of them during my pregnancy. So I did have to supplement. For whatever reason, I could do a glass of chocolate milk every morning. So with both of my pregnancies, that became my go-to. So I would get about 300 milligrams from calcium from there, and then I would kind of supplement the rest and fill in as needed. Now, vitamin D works hand in hand with calcium. So they're besties, calcium and iron, enemies, calcium and vitamin D, besties. So most prenatals are not going to have enough vitamin D. A lot of people, especially if you're deficient, may need an increased amount. So one thing I do always recommend is that my patients request their vitamin D to get tested early on in the pregnancy so you can kind of see what the baseline is and then adjust accordingly. But again, this is a conversation to kind of have with your provider. All right. So as the baby gets bigger, your stomach, like literally, there's just not as much room, right? The baby is growing, all of your organs are being squished, including your stomach. So, how you're eating maybe earlier in your pregnancy, it may not feel good. And even if you are hungry, which generally in the third trimester you are hungrier, there literally is just not a whole lot of space for the food to kind of get in there. So a few strategies that I like to recommend. So instead of focusing on, three main meals and, snacks in between, I usually recommend smaller, more frequent meals. And sometimes that may even just look like snacks. So it may look like a handful of nuts and an apple. It may look like a bowl of oatmeal with some berries. It could look like a small PB&J or something like that. But your body does need that energy. I would just try to spread it out throughout the day so it's a little bit more comfortable for you to actually consume. Also, during this time, prioritizing those nutrient dense foods when you can. And even if, so we are very much believers in nutrition by addition. Even if you want a bag of chips, cravings are real, right? So even if you want a bag of chips, try to pair it with, a protein rich food or a fiber rich food, just to make sure that your body is getting the key nutrients that it needs while still honoring your cravings. And then, you're still able to kind of benefit from the nutrients that is included in that meal or snack. So in addition to that, staying upright after meals or going on like a short little walk if possible to reduce heartburn, because that is something that is very common in the third trimester. And then just paying attention to your personal trigger foods during this time. Again, there's maybe foods that make you feel better when you eat them than others. So just kind of trying to prioritize those foods that make you feel good, that you can tolerate, that you're able to consume, that don't cause any digestive discomfort. That's kind of the way to go. All right, so here are just a couple of gentle, nutrient-dense options that tend to feel good in late pregnancy. We've talked about this in previous webinars, but smoothies are often a first line of defense for a number of different challenges during pregnancy. But especially when you're in the third trimester, you're tired, you don't really feel like making a full meal, you don't have a lot of room in your stomach, but you still need that nutrient. So smoothies are always great for late in pregnancy. Things like soups, light foods that are very nutrient dense. So like eggs, yogurt, berries, oatmeal, it could even be like rice bowls, which are like generally warm and comforting with veggies, with protein. Things like that can be really good options to help you get the nutrients you need in, but that are still tolerable and manageable during late pregnancy. So you want to prioritize foods that are giving you protein, that are giving you iron, that are giving you those healthy fats and, vitamins and minerals, but without making you, feel like you swallowed a bus. In addition to that, I want to quickly touch on hydration because especially during late pregnancy, hydration continues to be critically important. Ideally, around this time, you should be aiming for about 10 to 12 cups of fluid daily, which I know sounds like a lot. So I always encourage my patients to do what they can. If they need to switch things up and do a sparkling water and that's not causing them any heartburn or anything, then do that. Or if they need to do, half juice, half sparkling water, half juice, half water, if they need to do teas, things like that, they totally can. But hydration continues to be important into the third trimester, and especially as you're getting your body ready for labor and delivery and for potentially for breastfeeding. Alrighty. So now we're going to go into kind of some traditional and evidence-based remedies. So I get this question a lot, during the third trimester, like, okay, what can I do to make labor and delivery easier, essentially? What can I do to make it better? And it's like, truthfully, it's like, is there really anything you can do to make it better? Like, they don't call it labor for nothing. It's hard work, right? So this is definitely one of my most asked about topics. Now, there is some pretty interesting research showing things like eating dates in late pregnancy. Like the typical protocol is 6 dates a day, starting at around 36 weeks. So there's some research that shows that it could help with cervical ripening and could potentially shorten labor and can also help to reduce tearing. It's not a guarantee, right? And it's not like a medical induction or anything, but the evidence is promising. So if I have patients who are interested in incorporating this into their routine, I just share with them ways to kind of do it safely and effectively. Dates for me are super duper sweet. And eating 6 dates a day in the last part of my pregnancy was like not possible for me. So there are a couple different ways you can, have date shakes. You can do dates with peanut butter or like another protein-rich food. Dates, chopped dates with some nuts, things like that. There are ways to do it if you're really committed to doing it. But also, again, it's not, like a fail-safe or anything. But I do get the question a lot. I would encourage patients who are navigating challenges with gestational diabetes to talk with their provider first. And talk about how they can maybe, if this is something that they're really passionate about, how they can maybe incorporate the dates into their daily routine without seeing, big swings in their blood sugar. So that's a conversation, to have with your provider or with your registered dietitian. Now, red raspberry leaf tea is another kind of late pregnancy intervention that I get a lot of questions on. So it's a traditional remedy that has been used during pregnancy, forever. And some studies do suggest that it can help kind of strengthen and tone the uterus and slightly shorten labor. Now, again, with this, the evidence is limited, but it is generally considered safe once you hit around 32 weeks. I usually recommend that my patients start with, 1 cup a day. And if there are no issues, then they can increase to 2 or even 3 cups a day, getting later into pregnancy. Now, again, this is not a fail-safe, but at the same time, it provides additional hydration. It's very soothing and calming, which can be really valuable for a lot of patients as they are into the 3rd trimester and approaching labor and delivery. So it's definitely not, it's not a guarantee to help, but it also can't hurt. So if you are working with a patient who has concerns or who has curiosities about red raspberry leaf tea, does it work? Should I do it? Should I not? I always suggest providing them with the information and then having them work with their provider. So whether that's their OB or their nurse practitioner or doula or their registered dietitian, to kind of figure out a plan and to figure out if this is something that, they can reasonably incorporate into their routine. All right, so these are just a couple of other kind of traditional approaches to help induce labor that I often get questions on. So you may hear about things like, the curb walking and pineapple and, massage or prenatal yoga or things like that. And, similar to the dates and the red raspberry leaf tea, it's like none of these are like magical solutions. None of these are guaranteed to make labor and delivery easier, but a lot of them, support movement, which I love and encourage. Late in pregnancy, relaxation. A lot of them can help, with digestion. A lot of them can help with just kind of providing you a better headspace as you go into, the last prong of pregnancy. So and again, these are things that aren't generally harmful. They may not be helpful, but it's worth having a conversation with your provider about it if they are things that you are interested in incorporating into your routine, or if your patients have questions about them. All right, so now we're getting into preparing for breastfeeding success. Something else that I really prioritize talking with my patients about even before they deliver so that they can kind of be ready for the road ahead. Breastfeeding success definitely starts before baby even arrives. So you want to make sure you're prioritizing those nutrients like, the healthy fats that we discussed. We want to make sure that you're getting enough protein and that you're staying hydrated, because all of these things help support supply. And I like to get my patients in the mindset of prioritizing these foods before baby gets here so that it feels a little easier to maybe continue prioritizing those foods as opposed to, baby gets here and then you have to incorporate this brand new routine that you're completely unfamiliar with. And, that can just be a recipe for overwhelm and disaster. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. But foods like, oats, almonds, nuts, seeds, dark leafy greens. These are foods that, can all be really helpful for building kind of like the foundation for your milk supply, right? But again, there's no reason to, because I do also get a lot of questions about restricting certain foods. There's no reason to really restrict any foods in like a super significant way other than what is generally recommended to, restrict or limit during, normal pregnancy. And so as we were kind of just discussing about foods that you may or may not need to restrict. So every baby is going to be different, and some babies do react strongly to certain foods through breast milk. So common triggers are going to be like cruciferous veggies. They may cause gas or discomfort. Spicy foods. Some babies can, get really uncomfortable after mom eats spicy foods, and then baby gets that contact through the breast milk. Caffeine is something else that, some babies, they have no reaction at all, and then some, it will literally keep them up all night. So it's very much a trial and error and kind of learning what works for you and for your baby, and just kind of observing if there is any sort of impact based on the foods that you eat once you start breastfeeding. I will say that most babies are totally fine, and most babies don't generally have strong reactions to any particular foods, but just kind of be hyper aware, especially in those early weeks and months, just kind of figuring out if any of these foods are triggers for your baby, or if there's no reaction and nothing to worry about. I will say that I usually don't recommend preemptively just restricting things, because there's generally not a need to. All right, so getting into preparing your freezer for recovery. So your postpartum self will thank you for anything that you can prep ahead of time, right? So we're thinking, foods that freeze well, protein-rich foods, iron-rich foods, meals that you can prepare very easily or with one hand, given that your other hand might be occupied with a little baby. Things like smoothie bags. So my biggest, takeaway from this, or the biggest thing that I encourage you to take away from this, is that you want to make it easy to make nutrient-dense choices postpartum, and even into the third trimester, right? Third trimester can be really challenging on the body and mentally. So doing what you can to prepare during second trimester, where you generally have the most energy, to set you up for success, so that you can prioritize the foods that will really benefit your body and baby's body and baby's growth and development. Just setting yourself up so that that becomes the easy option, or that becomes the default option. As you head into postpartum, especially if you're breastfeeding, that postpartum hunger is no joke. It is an absolute beast. So having nourishing options ready to go just makes a huge difference. And I did actually recently contribute to an article in Today's Parent about postpartum meals and postpartum foods that you can prioritize. So if anyone is interested in getting the link for that, just drop it in the chat or send us a message afterwards, and I'll just shoot you a link to that, which may have some great information that either you can use yourself if you are pregnant, or that you can share with your patients. All right, so we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. We're talking about supplements and hydration for delivery. So as you approach delivery, again, hydration becomes really important. And that's because one of the main reasons is because dehydration can really interfere with contractions. So in those final weeks, try staying on top of fluids so that you don't have to play catch up, I guess you could say. So during labor, I would suggest talking to your birth team, your OB, doula, whoever that is who is there to support you, what fluids you will have access to. Most hospital settings will have water and ice chips and, all of that good stuff. I do recommend continuing your prenatal and taking your iron supplement during this time as you prepare for delivery, in addition to the DHA. So you can continue that into late third trimester, and then even beyond, to help support with breastfeeding and breast milk production. So again, I kind of touched on this before, but it doesn't need to be plain water that you or your patients are drinking. It could be coconut water, which has tons of great electrolytes in it. It could be bone broth. It could be, herbal teas. The only, I will guess, say stipulation, if you will, I do try to encourage my patients to choose beverages that are lower in added sugars. There's a lot of, sports drinks and beverages that individuals swear by to help boost their milk supply. However, a lot of these drinks have like between 25 to 30 grams of sugar in them, which can just cause a lot of problems, especially if you have patients who are navigating blood sugar issues. In addition to, that much sugar can kind of impact your mood. It can impact, a number of other systems in the body. So you really do want to minimize the amount of added sugars that you or your patients are getting in liquid form. All right, so we are getting close to the end. So the key takeaways here, if you remember nothing else from today, hopefully you forget all the technical difficulties and you just remember these key takeaways, but focusing on your iron, on your DHA, also your choline, on your protein, your vitamin C, your magnesium. These are all key nutrients that really support your labor, your delivery, your healing, and just kind of set you up for success as you head into that postpartum period. Calcium and vitamin D. These are two critical nutrients that can help support blood pressure and reduce the risk for preeclampsia, which again is something huge. And I will say, I encourage my patients to continue their calcium and vitamin D supplementation or prioritizing these foods in their diet well into the postpartum period, because postpartum preeclampsia is very much a thing. And a lot of people mistake postpartum preeclampsia for something else, and they don't get the treatment that they need in the time frame where something can actually be done or actioned upon, which can just lead to truly devastating results. So prioritizing these nutrients in your body is key. And then outside of that, we want to eat small meals, small nourishing meals to really stay comfortable in late pregnancy. We want to do what we can to set ourselves up for success, to really make choosing those nutrient dense options the convenient choice. Traditional remedies like dates and red raspberry leaf tea can definitely be safe and helpful for some people. I encourage all my patients to have that conversation with their provider, whether again, that's their OB, their dietitian, their doula, their care team. Outside of that, do what you can to prepare yourself for the postpartum period by prioritizing those key nutrients, staying hydrated, and really just setting yourself up for success. And that is all I've got for you today. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me. I truly do apologize for all of the technical difficulties, but we made it work. So thank you to my team for jumping in there and saving me.
Oh, wonderful job, Chacha. Thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation, despite, some technical difficulties, but we made it. So I don't see any questions in the chat so far. Just one I can start us off with is you touched a little bit about things to kind of, be careful about and avoid in that postpartum phase as you're breastfeeding and whatnot. I do have lots of questions about deli meats, raw fish like sushi, and of course the caffeine, which you did touch upon. But can you kind of, review those foods that typically are avoided during pregnancy and kind of, can those be reintroduced postpartum?
Yes. So the restrictions when it comes to like foods that you're supposed to avoid in the postpartum period, they definitely get a lot lighter. For a lot of my patients, sushi is like the first thing that they want to eat, like as soon as the baby is popped out, which totally fair, understand it. And it is definitely safe, once baby arrives. So there's not much that you actually need to avoid. I would say maybe caffeine in moderation, so like around 300 milligrams a day, especially while breastfeeding. That alcohol, again, it can be reintroduced, but again, in moderation. Also, I would just encourage, patients to be mindful of breastfeeding, and, there are ways that you can kind of time things appropriately to make sure your body has metabolized the alcohol and all of that. But outside of that, there's not really a whole lot you need to avoid. I would say when it comes to supplements, so there are a lot of supplements on the market that are supposed to help support like breast milk production. I get a ton of questions about that. Oh my gosh, fenugreek is one of the like super, super common ones. And for a lot of people, like anecdotally, it can help support their milk supply. But then for other patients, it can completely like tank their milk supply in like days. So generally, I try to encourage patients to stay away from fenugreek containing supplements. And when it comes to supplements for, breast milk production, it's like these supplements aren't regulated. Like, they say they have science behind them, but it's all very questionable. So I always encourage my patients, like, if you want, like, definitely give that a try. However, I feel like the better, more accessible ways to encourage breast milk production or support breast milk production are, one, making sure you're staying hydrated, because that's like the biggest thing I see. Patients are like, oh my gosh, I can't produce any milk. And I'm like, okay, well, how much water do you have to drink today? And they're like, none. And it's like, okay, well, there you go. So that, or getting enough calories, because again, they'll come to me, oh my gosh, I can't produce any breast milk. Okay, what did you eat today? Nothing. There you go. So breast milk, adequate calories. Those are really like the two things that I'm like, okay, drink all the fluids that you can and make sure you're eating.
Yeah, definitely. Fabulous. Thank you so much for answering that. Great review. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So starting off, Michael, are you aware of fruit and vegetable prescription programs for SNAP WIC beneficiaries through the GUS NIP bill through the USDA?
So I am familiar with the GusNIP program. I actually did some work on the Hill earlier this year, kind of advocating for those programs. And just kind of like integrating them more into the standard care pathway when it comes to like maternal health. I think they're great. Like, honestly, I think they're amazing, and I wish more people had access to them. And I mean, I would love to, like, Michael, I would love to offline with you to, see what you know. I haven't been updated recently. I did just see a post from the Food is Medicine Institute, kind of expanding upon like the advocacy work that they've been doing this year, which has been great. And I've been staying pretty close to that. But I think that would be like an excellent way to help support pregnant patients and, even going into the postpartum period, help support individuals get access to the foods that they need to really nourish their bodies to help prevent all of these, complications that can go on that can result in not great things, right? We're one of the most developed countries in the world, and we still have really poor maternal mortality. So I mean, I would love to offline with you, Michael, and talk about, I would love to know what you know, because I think these programs are like absolutely excellent.
Two more questions in the chat. So from Aspen, do you have any dietary recommendations for parents expecting multiples?
Oh my gosh, that is such an excellent question. So basically everything but like double. And I mean, I say that kind of jokingly, but also that's essentially what it is, because you're going to need, more protein. Your body is essentially working harder. It's like, your body is working hard to build one baby. So imagine having two or three. It's like your body is going into, double, triple, quadruple time. So all of these standard things that you would need to support a singleton pregnancy, you would want to amp up to to the next level if you have a pregnancy with multiple. So that means more hydration, that means more protein, that means, more vitamin C, more magnesium, more DHA, as opposed to building one brain, you're building, two or three. So that is for sure a conversation I would recommend a patient has with their provider, or more specifically with a registered dietitian, so that a solid plan can be put in place, so that the nutrient intake can kind of be monitored, so that you are looking at, okay, this prenatal has this much, DHA, but we need to triple this amount. So how are we going to fit that into the diet? Can we realistically fit that in through foods, or do we need to add additional supplemental protocol? Because that for sure becomes a challenge in pregnancies with multiples. It's like, okay, I know I need all of these nutrients, but like I'm just one person, and it's like, how do I navigate my life just being a regular person, having to like eat all of these things, or take all of these additional supplements? Like, it can get very out of hand very quickly. So that is definitely where a registered dietitian can come in and can really help develop a customized plan that helps fit the patient's budget, their level of accessibility, the supplements that they need, and really just like their lifestyle in general. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely a good, review and things to kind of think about too, so helpful to kind of touch upon that point. And we do have one more question from Maria. Can you please speak to fiber goals and whether supplements can help decrease pregnancy complications?
Yeah, so we're talking fiber supplement, right? So fiber supplements can be helpful. For some people, though, they do just increase GI challenges, especially during pregnancy, where your GI tract is already doing all sorts of wonky things. I will say, there's usually a lot of issues with constipation. Sometimes there's issues with diarrhea. So adding a fiber supplement can potentially exacerbate those challenges. So I usually recommend to proceed with caution when it comes to supplements. A little bit may be helpful, and may be helpful to like relieve occasional constipation. However, if you're doing too much, it can cause additional challenges. So in general, during pregnancy, the amount of fiber that you need doesn't really increase or change much. So for most adult females, you want to aim for between like 25 and 30 grams of fiber. But truthfully, 90% of adults aren't meeting that anyway. So I do try to recommend that my patients prioritize having a source of fiber, so a fruit, a vegetable, a whole grain with each meal, to make sure that they are getting enough. I usually don't suggest rigid counting or tracking or things like that, because that can cause more anxiety for a lot of patients. However, again, as a general rule, I just say, okay, try to eat a fruit or vegetable with every meal. If for breakfast, you're having egg scramble, like let's try adding some spinach in there. Let's try, slicing up an apple. If you're having a snack, like even if you're having a bag of chips, I think I used this as an example earlier. So have your bag of chips, but then also, a handful of berries on the side. So really just, I try to encourage my patients to include a fruit or vegetable with each meal and snack throughout the day to help them make sure that they are getting enough. But if that is not possible, a fiber supplement could potentially be helpful, but I would just say kind of work into that slowly.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone so much. I did put my email in the chat again. So if you have any other questions, concerns about this webinar, please send them my way. We'll get back to you. I will also send just our YouTube channel. So all the recordings from these webinars will go there. So if you want to access any of those, feel free to check that out. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We had such a blast, and thank you again for all your, understanding with all technical, issues and whatnot. But thank you, Chacha. You did so great. And we'll hope to see you guys at the next one in 2026.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everybody.